Hey everyone, it's Franchise Horror Reviews, and hope everybody's having a great day so far. Today I am still reviewing the Creepshow franchise, and I will be doing so for a while. I think after this review and maybe a ranking of the movie stories from worst to best, I might take a little break and come back. But for the last of these reviews for a little bit, we're going to be looking at a movie that I can't fucking stand on almost every regard. Creepshow, I mentioned in that review. That original movie is my favorite movie of all time. Creepshow 2, I quite adore in a lot of ways. Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, the spiritual successor, and the unofficial Creepshow 3, in my opinion, is a great spiritual successor movie. Even the unmade Tales from the Dark Side 2 movie, those stories seem better than this piece of fucking trash. And we're looking at what is called Creepshow 3. Released in 2006 by Taurus Entertainment Company, who you might know if you watch my worst horror sequels ever made video. They made Day of the Dead 2 Contagion and disrespected not only that George Romero property, but Creepshow, one that I love the most. This movie, after rewatching this, I swore to myself I'm permanently retiring myself from ever watching this piece of shit again. And I strongly urge anybody out there watching this review to stay firmly away from this fucking just despicable on every level possible movie. Unless you're watching the Creepshow franchise for posterity or doing a franchise review, technically this counts, but you don't have to watch this piece of shit. Really, just don't. Don't suffer through this. This was directed by Anna Clavel and James Doodleson and written by Anna Clavel, James Doodleson, Scott Frizzell, Pablo Papano, and Alex Ugelo. All of you can go fuck yourselves up your stupid asses. And HBO Video released this film, and fuck you too, HBO. I hate what you did to the Creepshow franchise. And after seeing Tales from the Crypt from HBO, this almost feels like a slam piece to Creepshow to kind of say, hey, look, we made a better product here. We made Tales from the Crypt. We think it's better. And I feel like they did this on purpose. And it makes me really hate HBO and almost want to boycott anything they ever put out because they fucking suck. Oh, God. I can rant a lot about this movie. But, yeah, this movie came out in 2006. It was a direct-to-TV/video movie. And when I heard this came out, my dad and I went to Blockbuster, I think, and we got this copy. I've had this for quite some time. And when I watched it for the first time, I immediately hated it. And I've hated it ever since. And this is easily in my top 5 worst films of all time I can think of. This is in there. It's absolutely abhorrent in almost every regard. And I really mean that. And I'm going to hammer that home to you watching. This movie is absolute dog shit. I don't know what went wrong here. So this little low budget film here thought that going to the Creepshow, franchise would be a cool idea to kind of sell some more and maybe test the water for Creepshow merchandise. I think around this time there was Anchor Bay releases of the movies, and I think they were entertaining, making some more product for the Creepshow franchise. And why they went this direction? Not only do they disrespect not the first movie or the second movie, for that matter, and the teams involved with both of those films who were trying to pay respect to Atomic Age horror and actually did so in a brilliant way. This disrespects even the people who did Tales from the Dark Side, the movie, or any horror writer for that matter. The fact that they try to pass these stories off as horror stories or anything original or anything ingenious or inspiring at all is insulting. And we're not even talking about the bad directing, the bad acting, the bad effects. This whole movie is abhorrent. And the first thing you'll notice about this movie is that it is not trying to pay homage to that comic book feel that those first two were. And if it is, it's so loose that it's almost egregious. Okay? This movie kicks off with this little doodle drawing lady here that you see with a crystal ball. And it shows you a town. This little cheap set looking town where it seems like nobody lives there. It seems almost deserted. And there's a hot dog stand with the creeper that looks more like Creepshow 2's design. This little dick and ball-faced motherfucker here pushing a damn hot dog cart. And this is the running gag throughout the movie and how they set up these stories, right? And there's not even a comic book to segue you into these stories. It just flashes you into the first story called Alice. Now, Alice is a pretty tantamount proof of what you're going to get out of this movie, right? Alice is a story ripping from Alice in Wonderland. And this girl, who's absolutely unlikable, you know, Creepshow does have some unlikable characters, but this girl is just really annoying, and just the way she's acted just is over the top and unbearable. And she's coming home one day talking on her cell phone, and she gets home, and her family, you know, they got this new remote for their TV because they needed a new remote, and she's, you know, being a bitch and wants to hog the couch, and she grabs the remote and starts messing around with it. But as she's messing around with the remote, she notices that this remote is not normal. It takes you to different realities. And when she uses it the first time, she gets taken to one reality where her family has changed. And this freaks her out, and she's like, how did I get here? Who are you? And she doesn't know what to make of it. And then she uses it a second time, and then she's put into a different reality. And then some body horror start to kick in, and it shows some kind of side effect with the remote of her using it. And it's really gross, and I don't know who did the effects here. I'll give some credit to Greg McDougall. I recognize that name. I think he was on a few 2000s movies, big blockbuster ones. So they don't look bad per se, but it's just there, and it looks really gross. And she's sitting there using the remote, and she has this deformity growing, and her family in new reality see this deformity, and she realizes that she needs to probably click through this to maybe get herself out of the situation. So she clicks the button again, and then it goes full-blown gross out with this body horror stuff, and everybody thinks she's the most disgusting thing ever seen, and she ends up back in her own reality, pretty much disfigured and disformed. And there's a twist involved at the end with a character we don't even know in the story yet. And it ends on such a dumb note. Like I said, it's playing on Alice in Wonderland, and we're dealing with, like, you know, going to different realities and, you know, fairy tale rabbits and stuff. Just pull something out of your brain, and you could probably guess the dumbness to this ending, right? And the next story kicks on after that, and you get the sense, right, that they're not really following an anthology formula from before in the previous films. They're going this Pulp Fiction route. Yes, this film tries to emulate Pulp Fiction for some fucking reason. And they tell these stories out of order with different perspectives of people that live in this town. And the second story kicks off with this guy. He's played by A.J. Bowen, who's probably the most notable actor here and probably gave the best acting performance, I would say. He was in a few movies. He was in a movie called The Signal, which is probably one of my favorite horror movies ever made. Really underrated flick. If you haven't checked that out, go watch it. But he was great in that. And here, I am disappointed that they misused his character so bad. But here, you get this sense of a running continuity throughout these stories, I guess, where this guy, he's like a security officer, and he lives in a bad part of town. And I guess it's supposed to be the hood of this city, right? There's homeless people. There's a pimp. There's a legit pimp with prostitutes in the building he lives in. And I'm not playing. It's very stereotypical and kind of racist. But hear me out. So this guy, he lives in this building, and he essentially lives in a shithole. He doesn't have a TV or anything, but he just wants some entertainment. So he buys this radio from this homeless guy, right? The street vendor. And once he gets this radio, he starts messing around with it, trying to, you know, tinker with it. It doesn't seem to work properly. But then a voice starts popping through the radio, and kind of, you know, talking with him. Since he's kind of lonely, he lives by himself. He doesn't have a roommate or anything. And he slowly develops this relationship with the voice in the radio. Kind of reminiscent to that movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix, except that movie's actually 10 times better than this. But it has an almost decent idea to it, right? So the radio is giving him life lessons and giving him advice to go rob something or go steal something from somebody. And there's some really bad sound effects mixed in as well. As you'll see, it kind of takes away from the story, which isn't all that spectacular. But throughout this little segment here, this guy follows the advice of the radio and feels like his life's starting to turn around a little bit. And he gets to a point where he thinks he's ready to do the final thing that the radio tells him to do, and he can get out of this bad life that he's in. And there's a plot twist involved that comes out of left field and is really dumb too. And it involves some people that may live around him and in his apartment. And I'll just put it that way, and that's essentially the radio. Yeah, this story, it had a lot of potential compared to Alice, which was more gross out. But this one was just kind of boring and flat. Didn't really do anything good there. It does have some hint of commentary to it about, society leaving you behind and stuff. But it's so slight, it's not even remotely intriguing enough to mention more than that. So, there you go. The third story, now I think this one had the most potential in the whole film. This one's called The Call Girl. And the story starts out with this woman parking her car on the street. It's nighttime. And there's these two guys outside of this house that overlook her and, make some comments about her. And she's like, oh, I'll see you later, And she knocks on the door, and this guy enters. Or the guy answers the door and invites her in. And it's revealed that this guy has essentially ordered a hooker to come to his house. And you kind of learn this motive behind this woman, that she's like a serial killer and gets off sexually to like killing men, right? Very Eileen Wuornos. I can totally see that inspiration here for her character. And she's not a bad actress at all. I mean, she actually plays the story up a little bit. And the guy, he invites her to the room, and she goes inside and he shuts the door. But we as the audience get to see that something's not right in this dude's apartment. He might have some ulterior motives with her as well. And they go into the bedroom and they start discussing things that they might want to be doing and stuff. And the girl's like, well, I have a suggestion, and ties the guy up. And presumably you think they're gonna get it on sexually, right? But she does something to the guy. Essentially to get off. And that's her thing. And you think that this person might be dead, this dude. But there's a twist involved that essentially reveals that he might be alive or might be something else completely. And the ending ends off pretty gruesome for the girl. And that's essentially that story. This one is probably the shortest one in the whole film here, but I definitely think it has the most solid idea behind it. The execution is kind of bland, but the effects look pretty decent on this. And if I had to recommend any story in this piece of shit film here, it would be that one. That one's kind of decent. It's not really trying to go anything deep in the story, more so than just having shock value in there. And the shock value, I'm not going to lie, does kind of work. So I'll give the movie credit to that story and that story alone. But the next story, oh my god, has to be one of the dumbest things I think I've ever watched in my life. It's called The Professor's Wife, right? Now, those two guys from before in the beginning of this Call Girl episode are revealed to be the main characters of this next story, the Professor's Wife. And they are some of his top students. They're supposed to be smart, top students to this professor. And the professor has invited them over to have dinner with him and his wife. And this is the first time his students have ever met his wife. And they notice something about her seems off. She's a foreign woman. She doesn't speak much English. She seems kind of robotic, if that's any hint. And the students are kind of like laughing about it and saying that this woman seems off, and the professor, the professor's not really good with women, so it wouldn't make sense if he was able to get a woman of this caliber. She's kind of attractive. She seems to be kind of level-headed. And they get into their thoughts and kind of think that maybe the professor might have engineered this woman and maybe have made her. So the professor forgot something for the dinner and leaves his wife alone with the students. And as the wife is cooking what she can, the students decide to take it upon themselves to inspect his wife, let's just say. And from here on out in the story, it goes really overboard in the shock value. And it's so dumb. I have no words what they do with the professor's wife. Let's just say it. It is bafflingly bad. And let's just say, after examining this woman, with all this gross out stuff that's introduced, they get the idea that maybe she's actually real. And they freak out because they hear the professor coming in, so they decide to do something with the professor's wife. And the ending ends on the professor stumbling across his wife and being mortified what has been done to her. And it kind of plays in later on in the story. So that's essentially the professor's wife segment. And then the final one is called The Haunted Dog. Now this one by far I think is the worst one because of how blatantly awful it is. Okay, so this doctor guy, he's the doctor of this town, and he's a pompous jerk. I mean, he just talks down to women. He's kind of sexist. You don't like the motherfucker. And he has this view about, like, homeless people and women. Like, he looks down on them. And he's at the hot dog station that's featured throughout this movie as kind of like the interluding thing. It's complete bullshit. But he gets a hot dog, but drops it on the ground. And realizes that he doesn't want to eat a dirty hot dog, so he hands it off to a homeless person asking for food or money. And the homeless person tries to eat the hot dog, but chokes to death and dies in a crowd of people. And the doctor doesn't pay any attention to him and just leaves him to essentially die. Now, this concept was actually kind of ripped off from The Hitchhiker from Creepshow 2 a little bit. But nonetheless, the doctor, right, he is sitting in his doctor's office listening to patients. He has an alcohol problem. He has a partying issue. But while he's stupid in alcoholism and drunk, he starts to have visions of this homeless guy coming after him. And this guy looks like he's been barfing up, intestines in his mouth and has hot dog stuff. And he's like holding up his hands, for food to the guy. And the doctor is like become scarred and has lost sleep over seeing these visions of this hot dog homeless person that he killed. And that's essentially the story. And he tries to make deals throughout the story to, remedy his situation, but he just can't seem to do it. And eventually, after not having any sleep, and he's had insomnia and all that, and his nerves have been struck, he may or may not succumb to the fear that's been driven into him by the dead homeless person. And he may or may not die. Now, when that story ends for The Haunted Dog, there's a wraparound kind of thing dealing with all of these other stories that kind of interlock, right? You see the homeless vendor who sold the radio to the guy in the second story. You see the professor has, left a chapel with his wife because I think they officially got married that day. And his students were supposed to come to his wedding. And I think they might be there. They might not be. I'm not too sure. And you see, some things about the professor's wife that were affected by the story she was featured in. And there's another character, I think I don't want to spoil it, but there's something involved with the end of Alice that implies that Alice might be there in some way, shape, or form, too. So, yeah, all these stories are supposed to be somewhat interconnected, right? And it went that Pulp Fiction route. Then the ending ends off with the creep looking into the camera with terrible CGI, like opening his mouth, and it just ends and rolls to credits. And that's essentially Creepshow 3, right? I don't really have any positives with this movie. I have nothing but straight fucking negatives with this. The Pulp Fiction aspect completely sucks. It slaps Pulp Fiction in the face, and Quentin Tarantino. Not only Stephen King, George Romero, Tom Savini, Greg Nicotero, anybody involved with the Creepshow franchise. It's just an abomination. Seriously. Whether we're talking about the interluding thing with the hot dog cart, with these abysmal drawings in the film, they look terrible. The computer-generated imagery, CGI, looks terrible too. The acting is mostly terrible, unless we're talking about specific segments, like A.J. Bowen's performance and the radio is actually decent. The call girl actors are actually decent. And then some actors, they don't do a bad job, but given the script, I mean, they had to do some really hammy dialogue. The dialogue is fucking atrocious, especially in the final two stories. Not to mention where those stories go is completely fucking ridiculous. In some ways, also Alice, the first story. I think Greg McDougall did a decent job given the low budget with the effects, like the practical effects and the body horror stuff. But that's about it as far as positives go. The writing here is atrocious. All these writers deserve a fucking Razzie. All right, Anna Clavel, James Doodleson, Scott Frizzell, Pablo Papano, Alex Ugelo. Fuck all you. You guys can't write worth a shit. These stories suck. I don't know what the fuck. Whoever was in charge of greenlighting this movie, or executive huffing on whatever internet gas or whatever the shit he's smoking back in the day, thought that this would be a good idea. Who thought this would be a good idea? Not to mention, Taurus Entertainment Company, when you look at their filmography, and they've made movies like Evil Dead 2 Contagion, HBO. Seriously? Seriously? Like, that's why I think this was done on purpose. HBO made Tales from the Crypt. They think it's superior. They look at Creepshow, who kind of birthed the horror anthology craze in some ways, and try to bury it. And they did. I think they completely murdered the film franchise forever. When they finally brought it back for a TV show years later, thank God the TV show rectified the mistakes that this piece of shit made. This movie's outright terrible. From its layout, execution, the stories are all abysmal. I guess if we were going to rate them from best to worst, the best one in my opinion would be The Call Girl, and I'd probably give this story about a 2 out of 5 stars. The second one would be The Radio, and I'd probably give that a 1.5 out of 5 stars. And then the rest are all flat 1 out of 5 stars. Alice, the professor's wife, and the haunted dog are all completely fucking terrible. But I think the haunted dog is clearly the worst one. It's so blatantly bad. And right above that one would be the professor's wife. Then right above that one would be Alice. Alice is kind of in the middle, but it's still dog shit. This is an abomination of a movie. If it had anything good, it's the effects and maybe some potential with like 1 or 2 stories. But other than that, this movie's a complete wash. I'll never watch this piece of shit again. This gets a 1 out of 5 stars for me. Nothing more, nothing less. One of the worst movies I think I've ever seen in my life. So yeah, that's my thoughts about Creepshow 3. Let me know down in the comment section. Did you like this movie? If you did, Lord help you. If you didn't like this movie, let me know why. I'm pretty sure a lot of people are going to dislike it more than like it. And let me know your favorite story in this, if you have one, or your least favorite. I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.